Hello friends, enemies, and those still under review. Welcome to Elle Chats, where I chat about things that I'm a fan of. I try to upload weekly, and this week we'll be talking more about the world of Emily Wilde. I covered the first book a couple of weeks ago, so there's a link in the box and in the title cards if you'd like to watch that one first. I recommend it because I'll be continuing to chat about at least 3 of the delightful characters, the titular Emily, Wendell, and her dog. This one is called Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands and is the second book in the series. If you enjoy this video and would like to hear more about what I'm a fan of, please consider liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment. Without further ado, let's get into it. The premise is much the same as the first book. What if fairies were real? And a field of study called dryadology. Much like the first book, Emily is preparing to investigate something new. Doors! The fairy realm in this book has multiple doors leading into their realm. In fact, at the end of the last book, Poe, the common fairy that Emily befriended, gave her one such key. Wendell is convinced that if he finds the right door, he will be able to get back into his realm, potentially overthrow his stepmother, and begin ruling his corner of fairy. This book starts in September 1910, so it happens about, and let me do some quick mental math here, 7 months? Yeah, 7 months after the events of the last book. The circumstances are a little bit more dire as Wendell's stepmother is attempting to kill him. It turns into a race against time as Emily and Wendell try to find the door before Wendell perishes from the poison, or the assassins. A secondary plot is that they are trying to find Daniel de Grey and Professor Acorn, who disappeared in St. Liesel, Germany, while searching for this nexus. There are 2 new additions to the cast this time, a professor mentioned by name and reputation only in the first book, and surprise of all surprises, Emily's niece. Yes, her seldom mentioned brother has an adult child, 19, who is studying at Cambridge to be a dryadologist just like Emily. She and Wendell share a common interest too, tailoring. Her name is Ariadne and she is described as, quote, round-faced with a long nose, covered in a smattering of freckles with her mother's hazel eyes and light brown complexion. She basically talks her way into becoming Emily's assistant because Emily did get tenured, but doesn't have an assistant. She's portrayed as energetic, intelligent, and capable. She does go to St. Liesel with Emily and Wendell and receives a scarf, tailored and enchanted, of course, from Wendell. She befriends the Hawes daughters who are renting the cottage to them whilst they conduct their field work. Next new character we meet literally barges into her office. Dr. Ferris Rose, the head of the dryadology department. He accuses Emily of academic dishonesty because Wendell is lazy and will pay others to do his work. He uses their first adventures to Lowell's land to draw a line between her work and Wendell's. He goes on the trip simply to figure out if Emily is dedicated to her work. He is described as, long quote incoming, portly, with a mane-like fringe of white hair framing a bald pate and of an indeterminate age, a common trait among dryadologists, this falling anywhere between 50 and 70-something. He is a known eccentric, even among the scholarly community, insisting, as he does, on wearing his clothes inside out at all times, and sewing so many coins into the fabric that any sudden movement makes him jingle. He has a network of tattoos extending from his wrist to Lord knows where. He is, like Emily in this sense, far more comfortable with books than with people, which is apparently also a trait common to dryadologists. He does realize that Emily is the real deal when it comes to conducting fieldwork and appoints himself as a helper rather than a foe. He warns her, rightfully so, about getting any more involved with Wendell. Yes, he does learn Wendell's true nature due to a mishap with assassins in a lecture that he was sitting in on to audit Wendell. We meet a couple of other characters mentioned in the footnotes and in passing in the first book as scholarly references. As mentioned earlier, we do meet Daniel de Grey, who disappeared while searching for the Nexus, and Acorn, who disappeared while looking for her. Daniel de Grey is described as very intelligent but rude. She also has green hair, as appointed to her by a curse. Acorn appears tangled in ribbons and reciting the directions that a bogle gave him. Of course, there's a new common fae that Emily befriends. She names him Snowbell, a very gentle name of a type of flower for a very aggressive common fairy. The fairy species that he belongs to is described as looking, quote, a great deal like foxes in all but their faces, which reminded me of a human infant, all over large eyes and small rosebud mouths. They might have been small children wearing costumes, but for the unnerving glint of very small but very sharp teeth and the wet all black of their eyes. Now we first meet all of them as they begin attacking Emily and Professor Rose while they're out on their expedition. Later in the book, Emily wakes one up from their little house after finding its door and asks it to please show her how exactly the key that Poe gave her worked. And she appeals to its nature by portraying herself as just a dumb, silly mortal, which obviously wins it over. After that, it comes back and follows her on her quest into Wendell's realm. We do meet Wendell's stepmother in the book, as well as a couple of other characters who are important in the next book, but I'll cover them more in depth in my next review, as they help Emily, but they don't really fit into the full storyline of this book. This is my non-spoiler section. This book is definitely more person-focused, especially with the hunt for DeGrey and Eghorn, as mentioned earlier. Eichhorn? Something like that. And I think I focused a lot more on really going into depth of the characters of the last one, and right now I'm really just trying to focus on my thoughts and feelings. As a sequel, this book works great. It works very well within the story and resolves some of the plot lines from the last book. It also does a great job of setting up for the next book. I think my first impression of this book, I had to reread it for the video, but my first impression was that there were a lot more people in there, hence the title. Oh no, people.
Good heavens. People.
Anyways, it's a good book, and that's really all there is to say about it. It's good, the plot is well paced, the structure is good, the events all make logical sense. It's a sequel. Not in like a bad way, but like, it's a sequel. Finally, all the characters are well used. I didn't feel like the story could have progressed if there was a character missing, which is a very good thing. Again, it's a sequel, wraps up some of the last book, sets up for the next book. It's all you can really ask from it. Next, I'm going to be going into my more spoiler-y thoughts. So if you don't want spoilers, click to the outro, I guess? The conclusion, maybe? Have a great time. I'll see you in a few. A timestamp will be provided. So I'm going to approach this part a little bit differently. I'm going to be going over it in a way that I talk about the good things, the things I immediately liked about it, the things I didn't really care for, and then things that I think maybe could have been done better. But I also understand like a lot of this is all in-character actions for all of the characters involved in the book. And if you hear any excessive whining in the background, please know that that is my very large American foxhound named Jupiter, and he will be whining throughout the video because I'm not paying him attention. Or enough attention, or giving him food, whatever strikes his fancy. Anyways, so the good about this book. I think it is yet another showcase of how intelligent and lucky Emily can be. She's very lucky to have Wendell in her corner, and she's very, very lucky to be able to figure out when her luck is about to run out, or things are about to turn sour. So again, Emily's character, on point as always, 10-10, maybe a bit arrogant, but not undeserved arrogance for her character. Ariadne, I'm pretty sure is how that's pronounced, is also a very smart and resourceful character. She's like Emily, but like if Emily had people skills. Emily notes this about her several times throughout the book, that she has an uncanny way of getting her way when she's going about life. And part of that could be attributed to her mother, or possibly her brother, Emily's brother, her father. Professor Rose is also an interesting character. I mean, just the visual alone of this man wearing his clothes inside out all the time, which is, according to the book, a good way to avoid fairy charms. But the fact that he's wearing his clothes inside out all the time, to the point where even Emily is just like, hey, that's weird. He probably shouldn't be doing that. That's a bit gauche. It's just so funny to me that it's... And the way that he's introduced, it's initially hard to take his character seriously. Then you get to know more about him through Emily and through her conversations, her recorded conversations with him, and you realize that this is actually indeed a man of much depth. Sure, it's not coming out all the time, and again, he's much like Emily and other dryadologists, where they're kind of like close kept. They keep things real close to the chest, and they aren't very good with other people. Wendell sews his ear on backwards, which I think is funny. After the attack by the Snowbell's type of fairies, he sustains some pretty heavy injuries, and she begs Wendell to heal him. He does, but his ear gets reattached backwards. So Ferris Rose now has an ear on backwards, which apparently isn't all that unusual. I mean, please see Daniel DeGray's hair, the fact that Emily has lost a finger in order to escape a different enchantment, and you're just like, yeah, these guys end up with a bunch of weird injuries. Other things I really liked is that I liked that they kept interacting with characters that were in the other book. So in the first book, we meet Lilia and Margaret, love them, and they actually end up providing a crucial piece for her to be able to track down Wendell's cat, which is how she cures the poison. There are birds fluttering under his skin, and I have to say the descriptions of all of that is very evocative. It's very, very well done. Wendell's cat is a character in and of itself, as per usual. Love it. Love that cat. It's not really a cat, it's a fairy cat. It's as close to a cat as you can get in fairy, but it does end up saving his life. So there's that. I'm rather fond of the cat. And then she also accepts Wendell's marriage proposal, even though she first said, hey, I'd like to see your kingdom, which we find out is called The Place Where the Trees Have Eyes. If that's not ominous, you know, just a touch ominous. And that's, again, the characters are still very engaging, the plot is still very engaging, but it's definitely a sequel. You could see the plots of the last book, the proposal, and finding the door, getting Wendell his kingdom back, and you can see the plot points for the next book, where they're going back through the Nexus to Wendell's land to actually claim it because Emily poisoned his stepmother, but that's a story for another time. I think maybe the DeGray and Ekhorn time could have been a bit leaner. Like, I understand they were wrapped up in the fairy veil and they were wrapped through time because you would hear stories about them appearing as younger or older or about the same age they were when they disappeared. This isn't necessarily a knock against the author, it's just I cared a lot more about finding Wendell than I did finding DeGray, and possibly that's more related to the fact that we actually care about Wendell. It was a great scientific community thing for them. It was a great discovery, and it would not have happened if Wendell had not been there, but he also didn't participate in the search so much. Emily ends up putting it together because they all have pieces of this fawn that has been terrorizing the locals. Ekhorn and DeGray managed to snare and kill one of them and divvied up the parts. She has a horn, Ekhorn has a tooth, and Emily has the foot. And after that, they all kind of start drawing to each other. And that makes sense, especially when you reread the book and you're just like, oh yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense as to why the fairy wanting to be whole again would be pulling these three people together. Another thing I didn't particularly care for was how quickly she went over Snowbell. I mean, at least with Poe, she had to work for it a little bit. But with Snowbell, he's just like, oh, you silly human, I'm going to take care of you now, and now I'm going to follow you into the other world because I want an adventure. And that's literally his motivation. And I suppose part of that is just like, he is a fairy, he will be taken by these flights of fancy. Flights of fancy. And he doesn't even fly. That type of fairy doesn't even fly. I do wish we had seen a bit more of Poe. He pops up a couple of times, and I did really like how she portrayed how time passed in fairy. This time she was only gone for a day instead of months. Ariadne was with her as well, and then there's the confrontation with the stepmother. The stepmother also felt a bit rushed, but I also know that part of that is just Emily's perception of time in the Fae realm sucks because it's supposed to suck. She's not supposed to be able to easily keep track of things like she does in the real world. And then we find out later she's only been gone a day through another entry of Wendell's into her journal. And I felt like there could have been more, I guess, romantic interactions between Wendell and Emily before she accepted his proposal. There was a fade to black scene, I'll give him that. There was a fade to black scene about halfway through the book, right before she finally finds the Nexus and figures the thing out with DeGray. So that was nice, but I also understand Emily is kind of trying to keep it scientific. So I understand she's not writing much about the book. Or much about her romance with Wendell in her book. There isn't much about the map of the Otherlands. She mentions it a couple of times, but it's largely dropped as a plot point, whereas in the last book, the Encyclopedia of Fairy that she was writing was treated as a much bigger chunk of the overall story. She writes that she checks to make sure it isn't blown off anywhere, that it's still secure, that the ink hasn't run, and how she rereads it to identify where Wendell added stuff and how he edited through. But we don't really see that with the map of the Otherlands. I thought that was going to play a larger part, but it is what it is. When I sit here and think about it, I realize the only thing I really didn't care for in the book was DeGray's storyline. I didn't like DeGray. I didn't care for her storyline. Sure, it got them to St. Liesel where they could find the Nexus, but Emily found it by herself anyways. DeGray helped her for sure in the end. They still had to rely on DeGray to find it, so I guess they couldn't have found it without DeGray, but Emily nearly found it herself. And in fact, accidentally disregarded the door because Wendell said it was just a simple brownie door. I understand where DeGray came in importance, and that's what I mean about, like, none of the characters needing to be removed from the plot because they were all plot relevant. So yeah, that's all I really didn't care for. Now on to the conclusion. So there you have it. Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands is a good sequel in a good series of stories. It resolves some plot points, sets up some more, and it's just a good sequel. Like, there isn't much more to say about it, and that's kind of the problem with middle books. It doesn't mean that I'm not a fan. Obviously, I'm still a fan of this series, even if the middle felt a little bit middle-y to me. But I want to say thanks for listening to me yap on about Emily Wilde's Maps of the Otherworlds. It's safe to say that I'm a fan of this book too. Now I turn this to you, friend, enemy, or under review. Would you read this book? This series? Do you have any recommendations? Please remember to comment, like, and subscribe if you'd like to hear more from me. Remember, being a fan is fun, and have a great day.